cities and communities depend on operational technology and information technology every day. And with so many devices connected to one another, it's our individual and collective responsibility to be educated and informed on the promising opportunity and those corresponding threats. Dr. David Mons of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Rick Peters of Fortinet, our sponsor for today's episode, will discuss this very topic. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello, my name is Pete Saronis, and I am super excited to be back with you here. We have an episode today on the Dots and Bridges Thought Leadership Consortium that is going to be compelling, it's going to be educational, and hopefully enlightening. My guests today are Dr. David Mons from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Mr. Rick Peters from Fortinet, but also by way of the National Security Agency, where he spent 33 years and has a ton of wisdom to share. Our discussion today is contextually around a number of themes happening in the world: critical infrastructure, cybersecurity. We'll address OT and IT integration. We may tap into some buzzwords like zero trust architecture and cloud, hybrid cloud, what have you, software-defined networking. But it's a day to listen and learn from two experts who are in industry and in academia. And my job is to facilitate, learn, and hopefully by the time this is done, you will be very interested in learning more about one of our 17 national labs, that being PNNL, and understand that Fortinet is not just a technology, but it's a opportunity for folks to look at it as a fabric that could be a part of an organizational security solution and architecture. So that's hopefully contextual. It's great to see both you guys, Dave and Rick.
Good morning.
Morning.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm going to do a little bit of background and then I'm going to kick it right into that first question so you could fill in the blanks. Folks, Dr. Dave Mons, doctor, PhD, principal cybersecurity scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Ridiculously smart, talented, and way cool. Cyber resilience, critical infrastructure security. Again, Google him, LinkedIn him, go to the PNNL website and just look at all the greatness that this humble guy has in terms of his brain and passion for collaboration. We're going to hit on a couple of his great topics, the Pacific and Senate initiatives. He's the co-author for Research Methods for Cybersecurity. He's a recipient of the PNNL Ronald L. Brodzinski Laboratory Director's Early Career Exceptional Achievement Award, which is awesome, but I wanted to brag a bit. But he comes to us by way of University of Idaho, where he got his Doctor of Philosophy, a Master of Science from Idaho, as well as University of Oregon Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Science. So welcome, Brother Dave Mons.
Thank you much. Glad to be here.
You got it. And then I'm going to come back to you in a minute here, but we're gonna pivot over to Rick Peters. 37 years, as I mentioned, 33 of which were at the NSA, where he has a rich experience. I mean, first of all, he's a collaborative individual, someone I'm very, very grateful to know. He's a storyteller. He's passionate, but technology analysis, the mitigation of risk, vulnerability solutions. He's now working with Fortinet, where he's leading efforts across that enterprise as I will say somewhat of an ambassador, but also someone rooted in what our federal government, what our critical infrastructure sectors need in terms of understanding the complexity of what is a security-driven network. And Rick, I just want to say, shout out to you for that time and that service and continuing your passion and mission to help industry collaborate with the federal government and our academic community. So welcome, Rick.
I appreciate that, Pete. That means a lot.
You got it, buddy. So let's do this. Dave, let's kick it back to you and just talk a little bit about your professional and personal journey, the formation that led you to the lab, but along the way, why you have embraced this career and what really is special about working at PNNL.
Yeah, thank you. So, a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think people go into computer science for two reasons. They want to be gamers or they want to be hackers. And I definitely was in the camp of hackers. I loved taking things apart as a kid, looking at phone systems back in the day, looking at how systems work. And so that was what drew me to computer science. And as I got into that, I realized that there's tension here between attackers and defenders, right? Defenders have to be right 100% of the time. Attackers have to be right once and get in the system. So I thought the job of the defender was a lot harder, and that interested me. And so as I was doing my undergrad, I realized I don't want to join the real world. I want to keep doing school. So I went to grad school and I continued to study. But it was at that time that I was exposed to a scholarship for service that allowed me to have a full ride, but then had an obligation for the country. So I wanted to do something for the country as a researcher. And so I discovered national labs. National labs are these collections of brilliant people working on all sorts of problems, from energy to environment to national security. And so I found the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in my backyard, and I was drawn to their mission of protecting the nation. And so I decided to work at P&L because of their mission for critical infrastructure protection. I didn't have much experience of that in schooling, but I decided I wanted to serve my country in my small way. And I could do that by being a research scientist and working on hard problems and collaborating. And that was fantastic. So I've been at P&L for 10 years, and my personal interests are critical infrastructure protection. Can we, as another friend says, bring power utilities kicking and screaming into late 1990s technology? But can we bring some of our understanding from IT, but understand the differences between information technology and operational technology, so we can secure these environments in a context that suits their mission? And that's the research I do. And then lastly, I like to bring the science of cybersecurity, and I'm happy to go on that soapbox at length, but science allows us to measure, understand the mechanics, and to predict. And that's needed to advance the state of the art in protecting these really important critical infrastructures like electricity, oil and gas, water. And so that's what drew me to the National Lab, and that's what's making working here a great job.
Well, Dave, thank you for that and painting a bit of a picture. And before I jump over to Rick, I saw Rick smiling and nodding. I mean, the mission of a national lab is, some people think it's just a bunch of, I hear this, folks working on scientific experiments, and then there's not much insight. Well, you can visit these places, folks, and just a little bit about the PNNL and its wonderful greatness, national treasure that it is. Scientific discovery, sustainable energy, national security. These are missions, okay? From the mysteries of the Earth's climate to helping modernize the U.S. electric power grid, safeguarding ports globally from nuclear smuggling. I mean, I'm reading things that are on the website. Please check out pnnl.gov, but 198 companies have PNNL roots in it. And that's based on a fiscal year, fiscal year, calendar year 20 report. But they don't just do one thing, and they're not just supercomputers. Those are the tools and technologies and instrumentation that places like folks from industry will come and collaborate, and we'll hear a bit about that and some of those opportunities, Dave. So thank you. And again, your passion is so contagious. I love it. Rick Peters, I know you're the Chief Information Security Officer for Operational Technologies North America, or Net Technology. A lot in that title, because I know you do more. Operational technology, Rick, as you introduce a bit of your background and passion, I know that's an emphasis for you. And anybody who's read or plans to read this executive order that came out earlier this year, 14028, folks, on improving the nation's cybersecurity, you're going to see OT and IT integration as something that's paramount for a resilient critical infrastructure ecosystem. So just teeing it up there, Rick, but great to see you, buddy. Fill in some of the gaps in terms of your awesome background.
You bet. And I'm glad you segued there on what our current administration is driving hard on. It's super important now more than ever to amplify partnership. And when you start to dive into that order, what you quickly figure out is success is going to be widely based on our ability to work collaboratively, to share intelligence, information, innovation in a way we simply haven't done historically, and we need to. And I was thinking about how our paths intersect, the degrees of separation And as Dave and I were talking previously, we obviously realized, yeah, we've run into each other, whether we knew it or not, early on in our careers. And that shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because the community is rather small, but you start to look at places like PNNL, and what do you realize? You got a treasure trove of subject matter experts who are working on, as David put it perfectly, hard problems. Solving the hard problems isn't glamorous. Breaking things, yeah, offensive work, that's glamorous. It's fun, looks great. The hard stuff is winning 100% of the time and being able to defend critical infrastructure. And, a quick characterization today, without diving into career, is critical infrastructure is, all those assets that citizens around the globe, certainly internationally, but globally, depend on every day. They want to be able to trust the source, whether it's power, clean water, all the services that come along with CI, transportation services. It's broad reaching, but there's a foundational trust in the consumer, the citizen, that has to be maintained. That's a high bar, and the stakes today are higher than ever. And I know we're going to talk about it over the course of the hour, but what's driving that? And as I thought back over my journey of my career, I spent a large part of it working in the intelligence community, working on hard problems, as David pointed out, because there's an intrigue in it, but there's more important, there's a much grander value to advancing solutions that are sustainable. It's so important. And when you start to talk about critical infrastructure, OT, the uniqueness of that domain, while we can certainly talk about the reuse, right, or the extrapolation on what we've done well in IT and then applying it to OT, that's a great place to start. And then understanding those characteristics, things that are unique, right, about those domains. You run into protocols, devices that you just don't see anywhere else. And so it becomes very important to recognize and be proficient in that space and respectful of that space. And I think that's another thing that the national labs bring to the game. And then you start to look at combining that partnership idea that comes out of the executive order and starting to leverage subject matter expertise in the commercial world, in the intelligence community, in the national labs. And you realize there's an opportunity to do some amazing things, and we're rolling up our sleeves to do that.
Yeah, Rick, I'm going to stay with you for a minute because in addition to, and I know you're a humble guy, but folks, Rick, 33 years in the intelligence community, there's so much wisdom and obviously stuff we probably will never talk about in a public domain, but the experience of working in a place that some people do feel like a national lab. And I think this is interesting, even to me, is, I can't go to a lab. They will never let me in. Now, maybe some labs you can't just walk in. There are guns, guards, and gates for a reason at some, but others you can. And the NSA is not non-collaborative. And I think it's just something that maybe you can reference a few use cases as well as Dave, that where partnership and collaboration is paramount, especially now in a world where we are separated and we have to have that dialogue. So thank you for that intro. And I wanted to stay with you because I actually wanted to quote from the executive order, because we're going to be using these terms. Rick's been using them. Dave's been using them. Again, critical infrastructure, folks, dhs.gov. There's 16 sectors. It's the water, it's the waste, it's the air, it's the dams, it's the chemical sector. These are things that we depend on, to Rick's point, every day. And I love the advancing sustainable solutions phrase you said, and having a trusted source, knowing that it's going to be clean water, it's going to be clean air. We've seen instances. Dave, you're dealing with the wildfires, smoke. We're dealing with rain and flooding here on the East Coast this morning. So anyway, that's just to paint a picture. But from the executive order, it says the scope of protection and security must include systems that process data, known as information technology, IT, and those that run the vital machinery that ensures our safety, operational technology. I'm literally reading that out of the executive order. So that hopefully additionally adds to the context. So let's come back, Rick, let's start with you in this sense. Fortinet is a company that has been around for 20 plus years. And I think this story that you have shared with me in our conversations about, like most technologies, hey, we're in a crowded market now. And Dave, this is something for you as a follow-on, maybe to riff off a few of Rick's comments. And how do you start? I mean, does somebody show up and say, we're Fortinet, we make a box and some software, you need to buy it and plug it in and we're your silver bullet? I know the answer is no. Can you talk a bit about the DNA of Fortinet as a company, the culture, the people, the process, and yes, the innovation and how you're continuously building that to serve a mission like a lab or a federal agency or a commercial entity?
Sure. But I think it starts with cultivating trust. You know, we talk about partnerships all the time, and in order to cultivate trust, you start by listening. You really make sure. From my intelligence background, I can't help it. I can't turn it off. My first instinct is to want to learn, to inspect, to do some research, to make sure that I understand where a particular asset or an industry is with respect to their own maturity. Because we could talk about solving problems, but first we have to have a healthy respect for where you are in your maturity journey. Because if I don't have an appreciation for that, I'm trying to be prescriptive with a way forward without truly understanding and respecting your disposition. So whether you're at a national lab or working with a commercial endeavor or some combination of those things, I think you start by cultivating trust, because then that allows you to get on with the business of doing consequence engineering. What happens if I fail to make the right moves? If I'm not instinctively understanding and then making those smart adjustments in my journey, right? Instituting cybersecurity best practices that, institutionally worked really great in IT, but now I've got to try and fold that into a connected infrastructure. And I think that's a big part of what we're seeing today that's driving, right, the impetus. Certainly data is the commodity of interest, by, unfortunately, multiple parties, by the consumers who are trying to execute business, and by those who would seek to deny or disrupt those businesses. We think about what it means to balance that, and it really is trying to ultimately outmaneuver your adversary by being proactive in your strategy. So when we start to think about solving problems, and the hard problems, it's really trying to get out in front of what I would anticipate from my adversary. I think that's an advantage. And so if you're working with an engineering organization, I would characterize Fortinet as an engineering first organization. You walk into the headquarters out on the West Coast and you're immediately dumbfounded by a wall full of patents. It's not your normal experience. First time out there 3 years ago, that's what caught my attention. I said, well, okay, they're solving problems. They're investing through partnerships, and they understand the absolute necessity for a technology alliance. So you build an ecosystem that's not based on selling your logo, but trying to solve problems. And then the nature of designing capabilities together, integrated, allows you to do things that, quite frankly, get you to the point of outmaneuvering your adversary. If I'm going to get out in front of them, I've got to have sub-second analysis going on so I can detect your behavior. You may or may not be an adversary that I have to worry about, but I have to treat all of those behaviors and understand what's going on so that I have a level of integrity and situational awareness. That's the table stakes today, Pete.
Yeah, and Rick, I'm going to come back to you because I think other than folks can go to the site, and I love the reference to it's an engineering first. We in the Beltway, the federal government spends close to $90 billion a year on $1 billion a year on IT support and services, and there's so many solutions. And Dave, you're helping develop solutions. You're obviously incorporating solutions. Let's come back to the security fabric and this idea of a quilt of capability, Rick, because I love when we can translate, a term like I'm looking at a few: security-driven networking, dynamic cloud security, AI-driven security ops, which is in the who is Fortinet, but how do we translate that to the mission, say at a Department of Agriculture or labor? And those missions are different, and yet tech is not the problem. So kind of come back to you on that, and maybe you can get some your neurons and synapses, firing and so forth. Dave Mons, I'm jonesing to talk to you, buddy. I don't really know if you want to just comment a little bit on what Rick said or riff off of it. I do think that the two projects I'm excited to hear about are, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Senate and Pacific, which are acronyms, folks. But if you can kind of distill some of what those initiatives are for, and it seems like they're embodying the kind of things that Rick's addressing in terms of what we need to secure our nation's infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Rick hit it on the head when he said ecosystems. I think there's a tendency in cybersecurity, computer security, network security to focus on components, secure this server, lock down that box. And that's necessary, but not sufficient. What the adversary is doing is looking at the complete system, and they're going to the C-suite that clicks on every link. They're going to supply chain and messing with the hardware and firmware. And so you need a systemic look. And I really liked what you said, Richard, about that fabric and that uh, ecosystem approach. And so an example from P&L is we've got the Center for Advanced Technology Evaluation, Senate. That's a Department of Energy Oscar funded effort to really look far out. This is an opportunity for a national lab to actually stick their head up and say, what are the technologies of tomorrow? Now, the scope of this is for advanced scientific computing, for looking at what the nation needs to stay competitive. And so we're looking at things like supercomputers, we're looking at things like 5G, 6G, next gen, low Earth satellites, but we're looking at all these technologies that are necessary for us to do our scientific research and development, and then looking at how we secure these. And the answer for Senate is the center. We do this through collaboration. We do this work through working with microchip manufacturers, with integrators, with boutique shops that look at supply chain. And we do this by collaborating with universities and other national labs to make sure we bring the right people together so we can understand the problem, and then we can look at how we do security inherent, right? We say this a lot, but it is so true that if you add security after you've developed something, it's less effective and more expensive. So we have an opportunity as we look at the next generation technologies to really invest in them and make sure they're inherently secure. Call it zero trust, call it, secure by design. These are important things because they make economic sense, but they also make security sense for the individual, and they make national security sense.
Yeah,
I'll
Dave.
briefly touch on Pacific too.
Yeah. Let me just comment, and then we'll jump to Pacific because I think that's equally unique and different, which I think is just exciting effort, proactive, adaptive cybersecurity. But again, folks, if you heard words that Dave mentioned, Dave, you used collaboration, bringing people together, working with industry. If I may, there is a myth that, and for anyone who sells and does business development, and let's all understand everybody's in the business of, driving revenue, but it starts with that trusted partnership, Rick, you addressed. Dave, are these communities of interest? Is this collaboration? Can people reach out and say, hey, I want to at least be a part of the brainstorming and I'm not here to sell? Because I care about the seeking, solving as much as the buying, selling. What do you say to that about?
I think that's a great question. Honestly, who knows about P&L, right? There's 17 national labs and they all do great work. But I think it's really hard to broach that barrier if you're a small company or a big company, or you're a private individual who wants to talk. It's very hard. And I would say I'm biased, but I think P&L does an exceptional job of collaboration. Rick hit it again on trust. We have programs that have been running for 15 years working with power utilities to help measure and protect them. And trust is hard to earn and easy to break. And as I said, I'm proud with the diligence that we have earned as a trusted broker, right? We don't always bring the solutions. Sometimes we bring people together, and we bring commercial partners, government sponsors, and stakeholders to the table where we can facilitate that conversation as a neutral third party. And Pacific, Proactive Adaptive Cybersecurity for Control, is a great example of that. That started as a gleam in a researcher's eye, and we invested internal money, and it resulted in technologies, deception technologies, in operational technology where we can mimic a real microgrid, we can mimic a real process, isolation where we can actually segment and secure, and then proactive censoring where we can actually monitor. And these technologies were, again, gleams in our eyes that we partnered with industry and did field testing. And now they're at the stage where we could work with a company that might want to take the patent or take the technology and commercialize it. And the reason we do that is because at the end of the day, we're about results. And we as a national lab don't shrink wrap widgets and ship them. We want to work with partners, large and small, that do that for a living so we can take our ideas and see them realized protecting the power grid, protecting our nation's critical infrastructure. And frankly, that only happens through collaboration, whether it's national labs working together or industry, academia, and labs working together. And I think Pacific's a great example of us developing ideas and then wanting to transition them out into industry.
I love it. And that gets into tech transfer, commercialization. And again, a very important part of our nation's research and development ecosystem of, hey, it doesn't just happen in a box, and the labs need help from industry, and obviously working and establishing that partnership with folks like Rick at Fortinet is amazing. I will say that protecting operational technologies from attack, which is a line under the Pacific explanation or mission vision, is amazing and timely. So awesome, Dave. You hit it out of the park all the time when you correlate an initiative to its impact and on humanity. So Rick, let's come back to you. Now, you and I talked a bit about, let's get into a little bit of the passion. Yes, Fortinet, Security Fabric, you do a number of great things. People can read about it. Please highlight a few. But you specifically, have a passion and an interest or just energy around IT, OT, cyber resilience. Can you talk a little bit about the Fortinet mission when it comes to really trying to bring that to the forefront, not just because of what's been happening, but because it's been in your DNA for years?
Sure. And I want to harken back to a point that Dave mentioned right out of the gate, and that was, thinking beyond the moment today, expecting innovation, expecting advancement and the adoption of new technologies, because part of being relevant in the solution space is looking beyond where you are today. And I think that's one of the things that was clear to me early on. When I started to work with Fortinet CISO 3.5 years ago, I said, okay, so why Fortinet? What's the discriminator? Why are we doing something exceptional that no one else is doing? And I'll pull three threads to the solution without being too techy, but they're foundationally important. You have to think about security with transparency. If you're going to design security into the environment, it can't be a labor for the end customer. If they perceive that, well, great, you've designed in, you've brought visibility into my environment and control through segmentation, oh, that looks great. However, you've just slowed down my production process or my ability to prosecute my mission by 80%. That's untenable. So what you have to bring is a healthy respect for how to design security in to do it in such a way as you get all those services that are we'll call cybersecurity best practices, and you can resolve those in a framework, but you do it in a way that doesn't slow the business down. And that's really important to the executive, right? They've made the decision already to connect the environment to be able to accommodate and accomplish the retrieval of data that allows them to pivot very quickly and understand what's going on. So that's wonderful. There are efficiencies there. But if you're not proportionally paying attention, right, to how you protect all of those assets, you have a conundrum, right? And so the second point is scalability. So much of what's going on today is about connecting to a wider array of enabled devices. Whether you call it the Internet of Things or the industrial Internet of Things, the reality is the number of connected devices is going to continue to grow almost exponentially, right? So we're into the billions already. We continue to grow that. So whatever you're talking about in the solution space has got to scale because you're going to continue to be challenged. These are global initiatives. Grids are across a nation. They're not, you start small, but you're building, right? And so the connectivity says, got to be able to scale. And then the last point in the thread you need to pull in the solution is speed. It's absolute. When Fortinet started out with their concept of their security fabric, they built it on a tailored operating system. So it's all designed with SOC technology, which yields speeds that are just unprecedented. So then when you start to connect the ecosystem components together, whether or not you're talking about a next generation firewall or switches that are allowing me to gain microsegmentation, putting all of that together and then figuring out how to harden it becomes your end goal, right? But I'm thinking now dimensionally about a solution that allows me to adapt. Why is that important? Because if I'm sitting down with a customer today, chances are they've already made some investments. They have some technologies out there, some point products that are in play. And again, I have to have a healthy respect for the disposition that they're already facing, and then consider how to make that a part of the ecosystem. That's where our technology alliance comes in. The Fabric Ready Technology Alliance says, I can have an API that allows me to design that capability into the fabric. So whether it's a Fortinet product or a competitor's product, I don't care. It works together. I achieve that level of harmony and institutional readiness. Because I was talking to someone earlier today about that. I said, what's really important? I said, well, if you're talking about the speed and the ability to detect an event, at the speed of business, it's readiness. You're ultimately trying to achieve readiness. To get out in front of is to understand your ability to prosecute your mission consistently. There's lots of frameworks out there. And, take the NIST cybersecurity framework as an example, right? Which allows you to break it down, to understand that there are different points in that loop, right? That yield a continuous trust assessment. That's your ultimate goal. How you get there depends on what you've already done and the steps you need to prosecute to continue to grow and move yourself down that line. I'll call it the journey line, right? To getting closer to cyber resilience. So all Fortinet does is continue to grow that ecosystem of solutions by adding network access control, endpoint detection and response, orchestration, intelligence services now that'll do back-end intelligence analysis that, oh, by the way, are industrially correlated, right? So I'm not dealing with, oh, gee, I don't know what you're talking about when you have that array of protocols that look very different from anything you're going to encounter in IT. So again, you have to have that fluency, right? And your ability to prosecute that intelligence and the ability to parlay and put together solutions into that ecosystem. I don't want to abuse that term, but it really is agile and adaptable. And that allows me to hit on those key points for the OT customer, right? It's a safe, continuous objective all the time. You never lose sight of that. But by pulling those three threads that I talked about at the top of the response, you can achieve that. And you can do it in a way that you gain that trust that we talked about before, because it's always about building and sustaining that trust. And as David pointed out, it's fragile. It only takes a moment to lose that. And boy, that's a tough thing to regain.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that for a moment. It's actually really refreshing to hear a company like Fortinet mention performance and cost, and not of the security products, of the underlying mission or business, right? I think far too often cybersecurity professionals think we can cut and paste IT solutions and throw them in the OT environment. And Rick, you said that you get that. That doesn't work, and that can fail catastrophically. The difference between IT and OT is monitoring our physical process, and that at the end of the day is their business, whether it's a peanut butter manufacturing plant or it's a nuclear power plant, right? They have to keep the lights on. And so when you have these security products that don't necessarily understand the nuance of OT and you plug them in, that can cause a big problem. And then interoperability was the second point you made. And I think those are just great examples of someone who's listening to the operational technology industry and understanding their problems. So I'm glad you've got that attitude. That's great.
Yeah, and forgive me, please jump in, and I'm not scripted here. And Dave, you actually just answered, because I wanted your perspective on, IT, OT, and do what you did, from peanut butter process to, how do I get a synchrophaser to protect data that's, in a microgrid, distributed energy resource infrastructure. Yep. So, I love it. I love it. Keeping it simple. But let's stay there for a minute, Dave, because I want you to have a chance to, Dr. Dave, educate the world on, hey, when you hear OT, IT integration, you addressed it, OT controls. People think of SCADA, industrial control systems, as operational technology and different types of protocol. And then there's the internet and IT side of it. And people have this, hey, we're increasing this threat landscape. That's why I don't want to have the Internet of Things. I don't want to have all these connected devices. But with I would say, and maybe comment on good risk management guidelines, stressing risk mitigation using the cybersecurity framework that Rick brought up, looking at the cybersecurity capability maturity model that the Department of Energy's instituted, the great work coming out of DHS and CISA, and there's no shortage of taxonomies. But can you talk a bit about breaking down why OT, IT, why should people care? Because it's the stuff that we depend on every day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've talked about the critical infrastructures that we depend upon as citizens and folks around the world. But really, as you look at the OT, IT divide, I think we often take for granted that these systems are separated and isolated. We say, We have air gaps, so no one can attack these systems. And if these were all electromechanical systems, that might be true, but you have to look what industry is actually doing. And as I mentioned, they're businesses, whether they're small municipal owned or they're large investor owned utilities, they are a business. And so what they're going to do is look at their bottom line and figure out what makes sense for them. And often what makes sense for them is reducing the number of truck rolls, having more intelligence and analytics so they can understand the power grid, they can understand the process better. And that's all great. But the dark side of that, of course, is an increasing attack surface. So we talked about industrial Internet of Things, the increasing the number of devices with a NIC. And so I actually want to go back 10 years to the ARA, American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. We had an opportunity to invest a lot of money in smart portions of the grid, and that was great for efficiency. But then we had smart meters that all had wireless interfaces that increased an attack surface substantially. So we had to spend a lot of time after the fact looking at that. I think as you look at the new infrastructure investments that are on the horizon, we have an opportunity to collaborate and make sure we have security baked into those. Because again, I think the key difference between IT and OT is that functional mission in the real world, right? And so we're not ripping things out every 3 years like we do in a corporate environment where you get a new laptop, a new desktop. These devices have a longer time span, but that's changing. We have more intelligence, we have more computers. So people might come into a control center and they see a server, they see a network, they say, oh, I understand that. I know how to secure that, not realizing that there's a front-end processor that then communicates over serial lines to these devices in the field. So that context is crucial. And that really requires, again, that collaboration between someone who knows OT, operational technology, but may not know cybersecurity, someone who knows cybersecurity, and then have them working together. And something as simple as security, right? I learned this early on. We were talking about security, and I'm thinking confidentiality, integrity, and availability. My power system colleagues were thinking about grid security, which means the power is flowing, it's energized, and it's on. So something as simple as the word security means different things for different people. And so you need a bridge to bring people together so you can have that conversation, so you can integrate those and provide solutions. And I think we've got a big opportunity in front of us right now.
Yeah, let me come back to Rick, because the next segment here is, I hope now that I think folks can understand that, look, it's not easy, folks. It's complex. It is a broader threat landscape. We have more tools, and while we throw terms around like, AI and machine learning, and we do this better than our competitor, and look, I'm sure everybody has something special. I think that's missed a lot in the cell. It's a lot of people can do a lot of things, and maybe somebody who started out as a firewall is no longer that. They're a platform, a framework. But I think this conversation needs to, and it's missed quite a bit. And the both of you are underpinning my comment here, and that is, why should somebody care about Fortinet or what PNNL is doing, and what does it matter to them is something that can be super exciting to hear and say, I understand. We talk in buzzwords and acronyms, and I think that's lost a lot, but not in this case. So thank you on that OT-IT component. Rick, this is kind of a general question, but you do call on a lot of federal agencies. You do collaborate with and participate in communities of interest. You do work for a company that's motivated to, increase revenue, but being someone who understands obviously the role that a trusted partnership, or the role of a trusted partnership, at some point it's the differentiation. And without spilling the secret sauce, how do you, or what do you feel government could be doing more effectively so that when you come to have that conversation, it's not about, I'm just trying to sell you another piece of IT equipment. I'm actually trying to be a part of that problem solving, or what are those problems in your mission? What can be improved? And speak freely, because I think government needs to hear how they need to be more collaborative at times.
Well, if you read between the lines on the executive order and the language, right, that's continued to flow from our current administration, what you take away is that historically there's been an absence of sharing, intelligence sharing. It's very compartmented. That's a shocker, right? I mean, naturally, there's this tendency to want to keep it close, right? Because There's equities at stake, right? When you discover a new vulnerability, whether it's a 0-day or some offset of that, it's how you manage that intelligence. That's very valuable information. Obviously, how you handle, how you manage what you do with it. Those are decisions that are made in private boards today. Equity stakeholders decide how to move forward. Do we fix it or do we use this as an exploit, right? And there's a dilemma there. But I think it always comes back to building and cultivating partnerships and trust. And that's that language you can take out of there, right? To pull it out and say, okay, they're pointing to industry. They're pointing to the national labs. They're pointing to pockets of subject matter expertise within the government and saying, we can't accomplish this mission. We cannot protect critical infrastructure and have the level of situational awareness until we're meeting on a level playing field where we get the best of what's out there. And then in turn, leverage the best in the solution space. If I'm going to put something out there and say, gee, I think this ecosystem might work really well, I've got to be able to put it in places where they can test it, stretch it, and break it. Because until you're breaking things, you don't know where the threshold is. So I've got to put it, if I'm going to asset test a solution, I've got to put it in a place where I'm really stretching it. Speaking from my former life, we always thought about cybersecurity and developing technologies as a way to prevent, the adversary from acquiring intelligence or information. Well, fast forward, beyond 25 years ago, and information is so widely shared and so available. It's the national intelligence giveaway if you look at the internet at any moment in time, depending on where you look. So now it's about trying to be proactive and thinking like the adversary. And if I'm sitting down with a corporate board today, my coaching for them would be, it's take a hard look at what's coming out of our federal government right now and what they're advocating, and realize that this is a gigantic pivot and change from where we've been historically. Really pay attention to the language that's coming out, and then ask yourself, look in the mirror, say, am I ready for this? Can I take this on? And start to consider an approach if you're looking at selfishly at your own environment, and ask yourself, what am I doing today to understand behaviorally what's going on in my environment? My coach to a private board would say, behave as if you've already been compromised, and start to ask yourself, how much do I know about my environment? And if an event were to start to kick off, a campaign start to evolve or showcase itself, think, supply chain attacks, right? Which we're all aware of. What would you be prepared to do? How could you subvert and neutralize that attack in such a way as it would be a minimal interruption, right, to your business, and you would extinguish that problem without it becoming a game changer for your business? Because we know that the public is consuming wildly. You don't have to look past Colonial Pipeline to realize that what happened. The consumer made decisions. Did it matter that the pipeline didn't even extend down to Florida, but yet people lined up at gas stations that they weren't even supplied by that source? It didn't matter because the perception took off. It was a very successful campaign for a variety of reasons. One, though, was the social response. And we have to realize that today we can't stop consumption. Citizens consume and make their own decisions. And whether they trust you or not is widely dependent on information they're getting. That's not necessarily valid.
Yeah, well, you hit on a number of points there, and I love that. And that's, to me, a bit of coming from that industry side of the house. We can help you in a number of ways. I'm going to come to Dave as if, hey, you know who Fortinet is, Dave. You probably know more about the tech space and who makes what and why it's good, and you do your own due diligence, right? Some people will say, oh yeah, we're a SIM tool, we're a SOAR tool, we care about observability, we can do AI and ML. And sometimes it's that, do you know what problems I have that I need help with? Let's start there. And I think that's the point, Rick, that I just took away, and I loved it, which is one, if you're selling into a lab or government, do you even understand the problems they have? And if you did, do you know how to apply the capability of Fortinet to maybe solving or helping that, knowing that they've got a ton of technology inside their infrastructure? So Dave, putting on that hat of, hey, say you had money to spend and you want to buy some new technology and you do your due diligence with your team. How do you, or what do you think could be good advice to industry when they come to sell? What would you say to them other than, yes, we want a trusted relationship? give them some homework. What would be your tips to a seller into the lab?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who works in the National Lab, I can't endorse or recommend a product, but I think the one piece of advice I'd recommend is you have a lot of power at procurement time and use that to your advantage. That's one of the best ways you can shape the security for your business, for your organization going forward. Make sure you do the diligence to ask, what are you doing to secure the code that goes into this product? What are you doing to secure the software? What is your supply chain like? Because I think it's really important to understand, you're as strong as your weakest link. It's true in cybersecurity. You may have a great security perimeter. You may have defense in depth. You may have intrusion detection and prevention systems, firewalls, whatever you want to invest in. But then if you bring a third party in, if you have a connection, if you have a supply chain dependency, so at procurement time, you have the opportunity to ask these questions of any vendor and make sure you're satisfied. You may not be the experts, but you know how to ask questions, and ask those questions until you're satisfied, and that's how you build trust.
Yeah, and I'm going to say to everyone watching, you can go to the PNNL website. I was on it last couple of days just learning and finding that, I have to prepare for this thing. I was captivated with so much coolness and awesomeness of PNNL, but they have a why and how to partner with us. And I think, Rick, if you can just, again, maybe build off that being an entity that you don't do the selling, but you're helping your wonderful folk at Fortinet to understand how to have a dialogue, a conversation, and sometimes doing that. Well, the lab is different at PNNL from probably the way they work at INL and from the DOE proper. But I took Dave's point there that, hey, do some homework on your end. Your capabilities, we may not even be aware of them, but when you can connect a dot, pun intended, and build a bridge, pun intended, you can really, magic can happen. And I think that's where we get this rooted trust that can be fostered and cultivated after the sell, and hopefully, sustain that. So any comments to Dave's points before we hit to the parting shots, Rick?
Yes, I say, and you hit it very close. It's be respectful. If you're going to prepare, that requires having enough respect for the solution space to understand that which is different. And David alluded to that before. And something as trivial as understanding that in operational technology, you're likely to encounter legacy technology at a grander scale than anything you've seen on IT. You're going to see operating systems and hardware that are 10, 20, even 30 years old. That's not normal in IT, but yet that's a reality in operational technology. And so you have to be able to field solutions that support an operating system that may be as dated as XP and be able to achieve the same kind of functions of cybersecurity readiness and resilience, despite the fact that you have an adversary that's going to go after and use legacy tradecraft to break systems that have vulnerabilities that maybe you haven't seen in the IT world for 10, 15 years. That's kind of the trade space. So you've got a lot of new technology being infused into OT, but you have a lot of legacy technology. So you have to be equally adept and respectful of both.
And a question came to mind, and I want to ask Dave this, because Dave, I am the student here because of what Rick was just articulating in this world in my former life where I loved meeting with vendors and learning about capability. And I would always say, all right, well, I think I have this problem. How can you help me solve that? And 9 out of 10 times it would be like, yeah, you just buy it, plug it in, and it works. The integration, you both have discussed the threat landscape. It's expanding, evolving. We didn't get into the whole, there's a cybersecurity workforce challenge we have in our country, right? It's not like go to school and get your PhD in cyber. And, sometimes not having a degree and just being on the job and in training is more, I think, effective these days. Plenty of devices, smart cities, smart cars, everything that I love to talk about. It just has to be architected in a manner that mitigates risk. Can you just, Dave, speak to anybody who thinks that it's simple, that, integration, you've talked with me about this, integration of what you already have with something that might be new. It's not a land, expand, rip and replace. Integration is pretty key to this when you're looking to secure OT/IT networks, right?
Yeah. So I had a project about 5 years ago that looked at IEC 61850. It's a protocol for communication in substations, right? And there was even a security standard, but we brought 5 vendors together. They all had the technology. They all were protocol conformant, and they didn't interoperate, because even in something like a power system that's very well defined, there are implementation differences. In cybersecurity, we don't have specific specs and standards for interoperability for your SIM and your firewall. It's a wild west, right? And so there's a lot of confusion. And honestly, that's why we need, yes, a shameless plug, research. We need to step back and look towards the future to say, whose role is it to help integrate and understand these technologies? Because it would be foolish to approach a company and say, I've got the silver bullet and all you have to do is rip everything out. It's even worse in operational technology, as Rick said, because they have, well, one, they have that real-time mission, and then 2, they have mortgages of like 30 years for some of their devices. And so really, it's the respect of understanding that context and then figuring out how you work together. And I really think we need to take a step back. We're dealing with the tyranny of the urgent. We're fighting fires. I get that. But what we need to actually innovate is figure out, how do we come up with protocols? How do we come up with standards? How do we come up with reference models so that we can come together as different vendors, different labs, different consumers, and have that common picture? And that requires some investment in the future that we can say, this is what we need to move the needle.
Love move the needle. And you used, you went beyond, and then I know, Rick, you'll resonate, this will resonate, integration, automation, and unifying multiple solutions is really how this ecosystem comes together. So, you cemented that, and thank you, Dave. So, listen, fellas, I mean, we could talk for hours and hours. Obviously, I dig it and I love it, and I can't wait for the next time. Let's move to the Pete's parting shot here, which is for you folks to leave something with the audience that you gleaned, or maybe you just want to punctuate, amplify, so that one, they'll hopefully go learn a bit more about you two wonderful guys and your companies, and then we'll close it out. So Rick, why don't we start with you?
So I'll end where I started. Cultivating trust. And what does that mean? It's building partnerships, and it's understanding that the way forward is built foundationally on sharing information, intelligence, ideas. And, to foot stomp what Dave was saying earlier, a national lab and an endeavor to solve problems means everyone's rolling their sleeves up and they're working in a way where they trust one another, that everyone's convicted to solving the problem, raising the bar, if you will. But I would say, don't be trapped by technology. That's part of the solution. We're equally investing today in our people. We're changing that culture as well, because the new normal is here, whether we like it or not. And that certainly affected OT, how we do business. So think about the people component of it, making them an asset as opposed to a liability. Think about understanding your business processes. In OT, that's very important. And then technology, of course, allows us to really focus on the nuts and bolts of solving the problem with those 3 threads that I pulled at the top of the hour.
Well said. You're always eloquent in your parting shots, Rick. Dave, floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I just wanted to summarize by saying a rising tide lifts all boats. So whether we're talking about the nation and how we have our coalition partners, if they get compromised, that affects us. Or if you're a small company and you don't have a lot to invest in cybersecurity, you should still be having those conversations with your vendors, conversations with your competitors, because in cybersecurity, what secures one benefits us all. And so that requires that trust and that communication. And you don't want to be communicating when you're under an attack. So I'd encourage you to reach out, communicate, and understand that cybersecurity ecosystem now before it becomes a problem. And that way we can all help each other to protect the nation.
I can't summarize that. I'd love to always say contextually what I took away, but you both are amazing. I want to thank you for your time. I know the audience will appreciate this. Dave, you'll probably be peppered with some emails of, I want to get to know this guy. And Rick, you're going to obviously have you've generated enough interest, I'm sure, for people to know, what is it they actually do? But to both of you, thank you, thank you. I'm grateful. Obviously, I'm honored to know you, grateful to know you. You're educators, you informed, you enlightened, and you taught. You're storytellers, and that is a gift. And that is a gift. So I know this is a passion. We will do this again. And in the spirit of until the next time, I just want to thank you both. And I wish you the best. Stay healthy and happy. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you both.
Pleasure, Pete, and pleasure, David.